Hey there and welcome to Space Haven. My name is Pete and today we complete a first look at this spaceship colony sim over 10 years in the making and inspired by games like RimWorld and Oxygen Not Included. However, it's very much its own thing in my opinion. Unlike in RimWorld, for example, logistics play a larger role in this game to keep your spaceship functioning, but it's not just about creating optimal living conditions for your crew. We will also be able to explore the universe around us in search of a new Earth and meet others along the way, both friendlies and hostiles. Throughout our journey, we have complete freedom to play in any way we like. We can be traders looking to maximize profits, evil space pirates attacking other ships and taking slaves, or orbital explorers searching derelict vessels and fighting aliens. The choice is ours. Quick disclosure before we jump in, this video is sponsored by Bugbyte, the developers of Space Haven, to celebrate the game's 1.0 release, and if you like what you see, you can find a link to purchase the game for yourself down below in the description and the comments. And with that, let's get into it and begin a new game. The new Station Game mode was recently added and allows players to build a more permanent home in space. But to get the best idea of what the game has to offer, I believe normal mode is still ideal, and we'll go with the basic platform scenario, which the game specifically recommends for a first playthrough. The abandoned mining station is more of a start from nothing scenario, very intriguing but not necessarily recommended for new players, and the small hub scenario already starts you with a slightly more advanced ship, best suited for players who want to dive right into the action, but I want to explain a little bit of what's going on, and the basic platform scenario is best for that, I feel. For our difficulty, let's go all out and select Brutal. This wouldn't be a proper Pete Complete video if we shied away from a challenge. This difficulty mostly affects starting resources, the mood of our crew members, the difficulty of missions and combat, the frequency of various hazards, and also our crew size. On Brutal, we start with only 3 people instead of the usual 4. And let's meet them. They are, as always, named after channel supporters in the naming rights tier and above: Adrian Hutchins, Leandro Mendes, and Marvin Haas. Let's take a closer look. First, we've got attributes, your 4 main stats if you will. Bravery affects overall mood and how likely a character surrenders. Zest affects energy, health, and working speed. Intelligence governs how quickly a character learns skills. And perception affects accuracy in combat and also how quick and safe a worker the person is. Adrian here is very smart and perceptive, which translates into the corresponding values in blue here. We don't need to dissect this too much at this point though. On the right, we find Adrian's skills. He is a pretty decent all-rounder. The only things he's not so good at are navigation and combat, and that's perhaps a bit of a problem because Adrian also has the Bloodlust trait. This trait not only reduces his surrender chance and work speed, but also wants him to fight more, which he is not particularly well suited for. Moving on, we have Leandro, another curious figure, extremely zesty but also lazy, which ultimately still results in an above-average working speed. His skill set is a bit more limited, research is his strong suit, and then ship-related skills like gunner, shielding, and operations. One of those characters whose role is likely not all that well defined early on, but he might grow into one. Finally, meet Marvin, the bloodlusty blacksmith. Also extremely zesty and a great constructor, and, curiously, also our best weapons user, at least in theory. In practice, his shoddy perception gives him the lowest accuracy rating of all 3 crew members, but I'm sure we'll still find a use for him. By the way, on Brutal difficulty, we cannot re-roll or edit people beyond their visual appearance. On lower difficulty settings, this is possible, so you can build a crew that's more to your liking. And with that, I think we're good to go. Let's start playing some Space Haven. Alright, so let's go over what we see real quick, at least the most important things. We've got our inventory in the top left corner, a few buttons at the top of it to see the galaxy map, handle schedules, research, and a few other things. Our 3 crew members are at the top of the screen, and on the right is where important events will be shown to us. Below that we have time and speed controls, and our first small quest, more on that in just a second. Our ship itself is at the moment not much more than a rectangle floating in space. However, it does have a few useful things already installed. Most importantly, we've got a system core, our central processing unit if you will, and a power generator already up and running. We've also got a storage unit here to hold our inventory, an airlock just nearby, a shuttle bay for our transport shuttle, and 3 of these small pod hangars here, 2 with a builder pod and 1 with a miner pod. We'll cover the exact usage in a little bit. Before we get going, perhaps also a little bit of background lore. Feel free to pause to read the entire thing here. Essentially, we're a group of spacefarers from Earth, which was unfortunately rendered more or less inhabitable in a global climate catastrophe. So humanity traveled to the stars to perhaps find a suitable alternative, and so floating around in space without crew quarters, any sort of amenities, and most importantly, without a ship drive, we take over the fates of Adrian, Leandro, and Marvin. Now, first things first, the game wants us to build a tools facility, probably one of the most important things we can make in the early game, as the tools facility produces building tools, and those are needed for our crew members' handheld construction printer guns. Yes, we essentially 3D print everything on this ship, and this facility is the key to all of it. Once constructed, it automatically converts these so-called infra blocks into tools, so we want to maintain a steady supply of those blocks in order to keep building. We'll later explore how to do that. For now, we have enough to get us started. The next very important task is then to ensure that the air inside our ship remains breathable, otherwise our crew would eventually need to equip their spacesuits, and inside of those they can't sleep, eat, or go to the toilet. So let's build 2 devices here. First, a gas scrubber, needed to remove CO2, smoke, and other hazardous gases from the air, and second, an oxygen generator. Unlike the gas scrubber, this device not only requires power to function, but also water, from which the oxygen is then extracted. The water consumption is rather low though, and we start with a bit of water already in storage, so we don't need to worry about the supply here immediately, and we'll also explore ways to gain more in just a moment. By the way, all of these devices can be placed wherever we need them. Power flows freely through the entire ship. Only a few special facilities require dedicated high-power connections. Moving on, the final aspect of maintaining a livable environment is temperature. As you can imagine, in space it tends to get cold, which is why the game generously starts us off with a few thermal regulators here, used for both heating and cooling, but as we expand we will need to build more. There's 2 versions of these, one to put on the floor, the other to put on walls. The latter is cheaper, but of course walls have a cost in themselves, so it kind of evens out. Placements of all of these devices does matter, by the way. This is where the game draws inspiration from Oxygen Not Included's tile-based system. The further away an area is from your gas scrubbers, oxygen generators, and thermal regulators, the more you'll notice that area becoming more and more unpleasant for your people to be in. Now, to complete this small task, let's build a wall-mounted device over here that should ensure adequate coverage in this area of the ship. With that, our crew's immediate survival is ensured, and the game now prompts us to expand the ship's hull. While it may look like we've got plenty of space at the moment, that space will quickly fill up, so let's make the ship a little bit bigger. And I think the right side here is well suited for an expansion. We've got a couple of noisy facilities in place there already. This makes room for even more. In the lower right corner we can also see the build cost. A hull expansion costs hull blocks. We start off with 18 of those, so we can't go overboard, but a small expansion is not a problem early on. To expand the hull, Leandro and Marvin now enter the 2 builder pods we started with. Those are used for any exterior work we need to perform, so that our people won't need to fly around in spacesuits. While work is underway, we are then informed that beds and a toilet would be nice to keep everyone comfortable. Let's begin with the beds, and this is where we optimize a little bit and only build 1. There's 2 issues at hand here. Number 1 is space, and number 2 are soft blocks. Each bed costs 2 soft blocks, and we start with only 10. If we build 1 bed per crew member, this can quickly become an issue, as beds are not the only thing needed to keep our crew comfortable. So, to conserve soft blocks, we're only building the 1 bed here, and to ensure everyone gets a turn, we're going to manually stagger our crew sleep schedules, so that everyone has sleep assigned during a different part of the day, and Adrian, Leandro, and Marvin can all share the same bed. This does not give any of them a mood penalty. In fact, quite the opposite. Instead of their mood suffering from sleeping in the same room as others, they now get a mood bonus for having privacy. And we can bump their sleep comfort level up even further with a bedside table. Higher sleep comfort means higher mood, so this investment is well worth it. The toilet will then go next door. This room we can turn into a second bedroom in the future if we need to. It too requires a soft block, and it is more than just a quiet place to take a dump. This toilet actually turns human waste into biomatter and water, which in turn is used to make oxygen. So in a way, our crew members ultimately breathe in their own poop. As you can see, we are also putting up walls here. Those only cost us building tools. A door, meanwhile, costs an infra block. We've got enough of those to start off though. We do want to keep in mind, however, that walls and doors make it more difficult for oxygen and warm air to pass into these rooms here. This won't immediately become an issue, but more and more walls will eventually necessitate the construction of additional life support facilities. One thing completely blocked by walls and doors, meanwhile, is light, so the game now reminds us to put some up. I highly recommend the floor and wall light in the beginning here to save infra blocks and space. Most powered devices in Space Haven actually give off a small amount of light themselves. You can see the different brightness levels on the floor tiles here. If we bring up the comfort overlay here, we can also see that light does not matter for sleep comfort, so there is no need to place a light in our bedroom just yet. But for work and leisure, light is beneficial, so let's put up one in this little nook here. It is currently rather dark in here. Up next then, we need to take care of food. We are offered two options here, a kitchen or an algae dispenser. This is perhaps a good time to mention that in Space Haven you can't simply feed your people anything. The game actually has a rather complex nutrition system. So we need to keep our crew members' diet in balance and ensure that they eat enough proteins, fats, carbs and vitamins, otherwise they can suffer from deficiencies or get sick. And this is also why we are going with the kitchen here, even if it costs us another soft block. If we try to sustain our crew with just the algae dispenser, the negative effects of that would soon show themselves. Nonetheless, it is a great device to have in emergency situations or when food is really scarce, but for the moment our starting supplies are enough to give our pawns some proper meals. We will need to ensure things stay that way though, more on that later. I think at this point you can already see that you need a lot more in Space Haven to achieve basic colony functionality, as I would call it, compared to a game like RimWorld, for example, where early on some food, a bed and a roof over your head are perfectly adequate, and a table of course, God forbid you forget that. Which actually brings us to the next task at hand. Not only does our crew need somewhere to relax, but the infamous 8 without a table mood debuff does also exist in this game, so to get rid of it, let's put down a table. This too costs a soft block, and the next item here actually costs 2, because while we could now place 3 individual chairs around this table for 1 soft block each, it is much more economical to instead build a couch. And not just any couch, we're actually going with the largest one possible. This one offers 5 seats for the price of 2 soft blocks, not to mention that a couch also has double the comfort rating of a chair. In addition to eating here, our crew members can now also relax on this couch, another way to raise their energy bars back up. With work on the hull expansion slowly finishing up, our next task then is to build a hull stabilizer. This is a rather expensive facility when it comes to building resources, but it is also vital to allow us to travel long distances. We need a hull stabilizer for hyperspace jumps. Once constructed, the device now slowly consumes steel plates to stabilize our hull over time. This is very important. The low hull stability warning here is normal in the beginning. This will slowly work its way up. Moving on, we now need to establish a water supply. The water we collect from our toilet will obviously not be enough to sustain us long term. There's 2 devices here, a water collector and a water purifier, and both require the right circumstances to be really useful. The collector turns water vapor in the air into usable water. The purifier does the same with ice that we can, for example, mine from asteroids. Now, vapor is always present in small amounts, also if you have a greenhouse, for example, while ice needs to be acquired, and if you don't, there is also no need to build the purifier. At this point, we are also informed that the water purifier is not connected to the high-capacity grid. Like I said in the beginning, most of the things we build will be hooked up to the power grid automatically, but some facilities use more power than others. Those need to be connected to the high-capacity grid. To do that, we can simply build a power node. A small one should suffice for now. And no, this node does not need to cover our generator. It's just a coincidence that it does. There we go. With that, we have now established a more or less functioning spaceship and can take on our first task outside of it, mining an asteroid. If we zoom out here, we can see 3 asteroids around us, each with a different resource on it. All 3 can be mined, and doing that is very easy. We just tell our crew how many units of the resource they have to acquire. For the ice asteroid here, we want to grab everything, and can now watch as Marvin enters the miner pod and flies over there to start mining. A very simple process really, that we don't need to supervise. With the ice we are mining, we can now make water using our purifier, and we can also see how exactly the transformation works. 0.2 units of ice already give 1 unit of water, so 1 unit of ice makes 5 water, and at the moment we only need small amounts of water to make oxygen, so you don't need to mine ice constantly to stay alive. That one asteroid nearby will already supply us with 30 units of water. Now, it will take a little while until Marvin returns from his mining job and we can make water, so in the meantime, let's complete the next task and build a recycler. This is another incredibly important facility, especially on higher difficulties where resources are scarce. A recycler also needs to be connected to the high-capacity grid, and once constructed, it will allow us to turn various types of scrap into usable materials like soft blocks, hull blocks, infra blocks, and so on. One of the most common ways to acquire scrap is to scavenge derelict vessels. We'll get to that in a minute. By constructing the recycler, Leandro actually also leveled up his construction skill. Skill XP are earned by performing the corresponding tasks. Up next, a medicine cabinet. This is needed to treat smaller injuries and sicknesses, and also to gain access to interstellar sickness pills, a useful tool to prevent our crew from getting sick after a hyperspace jump. The medicine cabinet makes our ship's general medical supplies usable by turning them into pills, painkillers, and bandages. And with that, it is time for our first small adventure. The game now prompts us to explore a derelict vessel, and because that could be slightly dangerous, let's see who we want for this. Adrian here is a given. He's got the best accuracy on the team and the bloodlust trait, while Leandro is a better shooter than Marvin, but Marvin is the bloodlusty one who wants to fight, so we'll have him be our number 2. To equip a weapon, we can draft a crew member and move them to our storage unit. Then we can open the inventory and take the gun from the close by section. As you can see, we only have 2 pistols to start with, which is why we only bring 2 people. While we wait for Adrian to finish sleeping, we can also install a decorative screen in our leisure area here. This will give it another small comfort boost and thus raise the mood of everyone who spends some time here. A short while later then, Adrian and Marvin are ready to go. The 2 pistols are sadly the only piece of gear we can give them, so let's draft them and have them enter our shuttle. The derelict vessel can be found in this corner of the sector, and with the shuttle drafted, we can tell it to dock at one of 2 possible entry points. After that, the shuttle automatically gets moving, and while we explore, we also want to give Leandro something to do, so let's queue up the other 2 asteroids to be mined. One has Hyperium, the other Energium. We don't need to cover those in detail just yet, but both have their uses. Our 2 explorers, Adrian and Marvin, meanwhile, dock at the derelict vessel and can now exit in their spacesuits, and with that we can begin scouting out the ship. Now, as you can see, it doesn't take long until we have company. 2 crawling bugs emerge from the shadows, and we want to kill them before they can do any harm. Luckily, while these guys are vacuum resistant, they cannot cross gaps in the ship's hull, so we can use the hole in the floor here to cleverly keep our distance. As you can see, combat is rather slow-paced here early on. Adrian and Marvin are not exactly great fighters, and the pistol is one of the weaker weapons in the game. Nonetheless, we manage to clear out the 2 crawlers and can move on. For now, any loot we find, like this pile of goods here, does not have to concern us. we can safely collect everything once the ship is cleared. One more enemy stands in our way, but once more, a convenient hull breach ensures our safety. We can even shoot while we float in our spacesuits, although as far as I know, that gives a small accuracy penalty. Exploring further, we don't find anything of interest for a while until we get to this point here. The magnifying glass indicates that we can take a closer look. Sadly though, the inspection does not reveal anything to be there. Right next door, however, we find a data log, a bit of backstory on this ship. Apparently, it was a research vessel, its captain musing over the idea of an older, wiser species being the answer to all of Earth's problems. Unfortunately though, what we find on board here is not exactly promising in that regard. Either way, after a few more steps on board, we receive the message that the ship is officially fully explored, and that means we can now salvage it. Salvaging works in two parts. First, we can strip down the ship's facilities, essentially deconstructing it. The list here shows how likely it is that we obtain the various types of scrap in the process. On top of that, we can also transfer any items we find on board back over to our ship. This includes some scrap as well, but in this case also food, water, plastics and fertilizer. Once we give the order, our crew begins gathering items and carries them back to the shuttle. From here on out, everything will happen automatically. Now, salvaging this ship will take a while, so let's shift our attention to the next task. Finally, the game asks us to build 2 hyperdrives and a navigation console to operate them. Now, we can place these drives at what I guess is now the back of our ship here. They too require a decent amount of materials to build, and the larger our ship becomes, the more of them we need to move all that mass. For now, we're actually going to pause the construction though. Keep in mind we only have 3 crew members and we don't want to overwhelm them. And of course, there's also no need to build hyperdrives to fly away with, as long as we still have asteroids to mine and a derelict vessel to salvage. That salvaging, by the way, is mostly done by our 2 builder pods. You can see here how a pod strips away the hull, and upon its return to our ship, we now have a big pile of scrap to work with. So let's do something with it and use the recycler to turn it back into usable materials. The various types of scrap will all result in different types and quantities of new blocks. One piece of infra scrap, for example, produces half an infra block and a small fraction of an electronics component. So this is what our 3 crew members will be doing for a little while now, stripping down the derelict vessel, bringing scrap and resources back home, and using the recycler to transform them into something we can use. Eventually then, on the beginning of our 4th day here in space, we can unpause the construction of the 2 hyperdrives and watch as our ship finally receives some engines. Now, without a navigation console, they are useless, and the one on the left here also needs to be connected to the high-capacity grid. Seems like it's just outside the coverage, determined by one specific connection point for each facility that we can build. So having just parts of a device covered by the grid can sometimes be enough. Other times it might not be. Now, moving on, let's get that navigation console constructed, another device that requires one of those precious soft blocks, and we're also slowly starting to run out of infra blocks. For the time being, though, we still have enough to get the console up and running. And with that, we could now prepare for our first hyperspace jump, but first, the game wants us to build an operations console and some turrets. Both are very useful. The operation console will enable us to communicate with other vessels. The turrets are used to defend against smaller enemy crafts or incoming asteroids. Now, the operations console we can swiftly build. For the turret, meanwhile, we are missing some infra blocks, as indicated in red here. This is brutal difficulty in action. We don't even start with enough resources to complete this short tutorial questline here. But fear not, Adrian is already working the recycler to make more. And so, a short while later, our very first defense turret is built, right in the back of the ship here. This renders a small area inaccessible, but will likely expand the design soon anyway to get rid of the issue. Now, while it does make sense to have more than one turret, for now we need to use our resources sparingly, and we've got a research lab to establish, so let's focus on that first. The lab itself is the main facility here. This is where the majority of research progress happens, and you can build multiple of these. The research workbench is occasionally needed in addition to it to perform specific experiments. Depending on your early game research path, you can get away with just building the lab in the beginning though. Now we need to wait a little while until we can build either one. Once again, the infra blocks are the bottleneck, but after a few hours at the recycler, lab and workbench are eventually both fully operational. And with that, let's take a look at Space Haven's research screen. You'll notice quickly we have only scratched the surface of what the game has to offer. Down the line, we'll be able to unlock tools to build a more powerful battleship, optimize our power and resource production, discover the means to manufacture high-tech armor and weapons, and even cybernetic augmentations for our crew members. We can also unlock robots to work and fight for us, study the alien creatures we meet along the way, and of course grow our own food. All of this is done with research projects that work as follows. Let's take the robotics project here as an example. It requires 60 points of basic research, 20 points of intermediate, and 10 points of advanced research. These different levels of research require increasingly high research skill levels, so while someone with a level 1 research skill would still be able to produce basic research points somewhat reliably, for advanced research points you'll need someone with a higher skill to regularly succeed. There are some projects, like the X1 hyperdrive here for example, that also require experiments to be performed. That's what the research workbench is for. But again, if early on you prioritize projects without this requirement, you can postpone building it for a while. Now, we won't dive too much into research here today, but a good early research path on this difficulty would be to unlock solar panels relatively quickly to become a bit more self-sufficient in your power production. Botany is also quick to complete and makes a lot of sense unless you want to continuously buy or scavenge your food or want to rely on the algae dispenser. Medical beds could be useful depending on how adventurous you are. The same goes for the item fabricator, which lets you make your own weapons. And finally, do not overlook advanced disassembly, which reduces the strain on your resources by increasing the materials you regain from disassembling structures and devices. Let's start with botany for now though. Growing our own food seems sensible, and we can watch Leandro spring into action immediately here. With his level 3 research skill, he should ensure we make swift progress. Now, at this point you can also see that the derelict vessel here has been mostly stripped clean. Some soft and infra scrap can still be found, but after a few more hours, I think it's time we turn our attention to our next and perhaps most exciting task, making a hyperspace jump. Finally, we can leave this system and explore a bit. To do this, we simply need to bring up the systems screen here and tell our crew to prepare for a hyperjump. This immediately calls back all pods and shuttles, and Marvin will now use the navigation console to fire up our 2 hyperdrives. Now, be warned, this is a very power-hungry task, so keep that in mind when traveling, but eventually the hyperdrives are ready and we can jump. Doing so immediately brings up a message from Sheridan here, commander of the Haven Foundation Exodus fleet. To summarize, Sheridan commands a fleet with thousands of refugees from Earth in hypersleep on their journey to find a place to make a fresh start. And now that he's found us, he asks whether we'd like to join up as Pathfinders, those who scout ahead and keep hope alive for all of those on board. And well, even though you technically don't have to, I highly recommend you accept this quest on your first go around. It is the game's main quest line, if you will, and offers a lot of interesting story moments and rewards. Now then, as a fresh Pathfinder ship, our first reward is now a hyperspace beacon, or at least it would be if Sheridan had one. Instead, we will now have to acquire it ourselves from the last guy who joined and quit soon after. This now gives us our first quest of the game. We need to find and speak to this guy Saul Kane here, located in Asteroid Field 3. For our efforts, we can choose one of 2 rewards, prestige or credits. Prestige is useful as a currency with factions like the Haven Foundation here to obtain useful items. Credits are obviously a bit more versatile and more widely accepted. I personally believe this decision is mostly personal preference, but since credits can also be obtained in many other ways and prestige is a bit more limited to these quests, let's go with prestige. At this point, we can then pick our next destination, and for now we only have one route to take, to asteroid field 12 over here. Sadly, there's nothing of interest to be found there, indicated by those small icons on the outside of the circle, or in this case the lack of it, which is why we will not come out of hyperspace just yet. Remember, each time we do, we need to fire up the engines again, and instead move right along to asteroid field 5 over here. This one has ice, exotic ores, basic ores, and a derelict vessel. Sounds like it may be worth making a quick stop at the very least. From here, we then uncover more destinations, including asteroid field 3, our quest destination, and the home of a few other points of interest. However, we have found an interesting spot here, so let's investigate it further first. For our deployment, it often makes sense to position ourselves as close as possible to the derelict vessel, if there is one, so that the eventual salvaging is sped up by short travel distances. And so here we are, out of hyperspace, right next to a derelict vessel to salvage, and with an asteroid that houses several interesting ores just waiting to be mined. I would say let's take a peek at that vessel first though. This time we're leaving Adrian behind and have Leandro and Marvin scouted out, and unfortunately, as soon as they arrive, they are ambushed by a tiny flying robot shooting at them. This is a slightly more serious threat, at least this early in the game, and on this difficulty. As you can see, it takes quite a few hits from our pistols to eventually destroy the bot. Both of our crew members took some minor injuries in the process, and unfortunately, as we head deeper into the ship, we find even more of them. Now, full disclosure, on brutal difficulty, a derelict vessel with 3 of these bots can easily down a small scouting party like ours here. The smart move probably would have been to retreat and perhaps even leave the ship in peace entirely, but I wanted to show this to you. Ultimately, I think we can call ourselves lucky to make it out with Leandro and Marvin both still standing. A few steps further and the vessel can now also already be salvaged, but for our 2 adventurers, I think it's high time to come back and treat their injuries. We've got quite the collection of negatives here: blast injuries, general pain, burn wounds, other wounds, and Marvin even has an open wound that needs bandaging as soon as possible, unless we want it to get worse. To that end, we can actually have Adrian here, our highest skilled doctor, pick up some bandages from the medicine cabinet, and once our 2 explorers return, he can see to it that Marvin's bleeding wound is tended to. This stops the bleeding and prevents the injury from getting worse. All other wounds will heal in time, although it might take a few days for the more serious ones to do so. And I think this serves nicely as a cautionary tale perhaps to end this video on. Once again, let me make very clear that no matter how long, in only one video you can barely scratch the surface of everything that Space Haven has to offer. I hope I was able to showcase a few of its mechanics though, and perhaps help you get started should you decide to pick it up yourself. Once again, you can find the game linked down below. I'll be the first to admit that Space Haven may look overwhelming at first and definitely has a steep learning curve, but once things start to click, there is potential for an amazing journey here and some very fun stories along the way. So I hope you enjoyed this first look at Space Haven. If you did, I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more, then feel free to let me know in the comments down below. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course also go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or become a channel member or Patreon supporter. Thanks again to Bugbyte for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.